Supplement companies spent $40 billion last year convincing you that muscle requires meat, or at minimum, a shaker cup full of expensive powder. $40 billion. And while that industry was growing rich, the answers were sitting in texts written 3,000 years ago in seed markets along the ancient Silk Road, in temple kitchens in China, in the mountain villages of the Inca, waiting for us to remember. Today we are counting down 13 plant foods that the ancient world used to build extraordinary physical strength. Not theory, not trend. History. Modern researchers are now confirming what these civilizations discovered through centuries of careful daily observation. Stay with me through the full list. Number 1 will stop you cold. It is something so common that most people have it in their pantry right now and have no idea it contains more complete protein than almost any supplement on the market. And around number 7. I am going to tell you a story about a man alone in the wilderness, so depleted he asked to die, and what an angel placed before him to restore his body. That story is not just scripture. It is a case study in physiological collapse and whole food recovery. Number 13. Lentils. In Genesis chapter 25, a man named Esau came in from the field, exhausted. The Hebrew word used suggests complete, bone-deep fatigue, not ordinary tiredness. His brother Jacob was cooking a pot of red lentil stew, and Esau made one of the most consequential food decisions in biblical history. He traded his birthright, his entire inheritance, as the firstborn son, for a single bowl. This was not desperation for something rare. Lentils were common, and yet the desire was so overwhelming that he surrendered everything for them. Egyptian laborers who built the great monuments ate lentils as a cornerstone protein. Roman soldiers were issued lentil rations on campaign. In the Mishnah, the codification of Jewish oral law lentils appear in connection with morning meals. Food substantial enough to restore a grieving body. 3 civilizations, across thousands of miles and thousands of years, reached the same conclusion about this tiny disc-shaped seed. A single cooked cup of lentils delivers approximately 18 grams of protein, alongside iron and folate nutrients that carry oxygen to working muscle tissue. But the compound most discussions leave out is resistant starch, a carbohydrate that feeds beneficial gut bacteria and is converted into short-chain fatty acids that researchers now believe play a direct role in reducing systemic inflammation. Inflammation is the enemy of muscle recovery. The ancient intuition that lentils sustained laborers through physical work is consistent with a mechanism science is still characterizing. Soak lentils for 4 to 8 hours before cooking. This reduces phytates compounds that bind to minerals and limit their absorption, releasing measurably more iron and zinc. Red lentils cook down creamy in 20 minutes. Ideal for soups. Green lentils hold their shape for salads and cold preparation. The technique is ancient. The biochemical reason is now understood. The Talmudic sages wrote that lentils, unlike other legumes, have no opening, no mouth, and are therefore appropriate for mourning, because the grieving cannot speak. That level of cultural attention tells you something. This was not just a food. It was understood. Number 12. Chickpeas. The chickpea appears in the archaeological record of the ancient Near East, going back approximately 10,000 years, one of the earliest cultivated legumes in human history. In the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 17, when David was fleeing his son Absalom through the wilderness, a man named Barzillai brought provisions to David's weary army. Among those provisions, translated variously as parched grain and pulse, ancient commentators and food historians identify chickpeas as a likely component of that emergency sustenance. The logic is, practical chickpeas could be dried, carried long distances, and eaten roasted directly from a pouch without any cooking at all. Egyptian pyramid builders were fed chickpeas as part of organized worker rations. Greek physicians, including Dioscorides, wrote about their use as a strengthening food. Indian Ayurvedic texts from the classical period referenced chana chickpeas for building what they called ojas, a concept roughly equivalent to vital physical resilience. Three civilizations separated by ocean and mountain range, arriving at the same strength food. A cooked cup of chickpeas delivers between 12 and 15 grams of protein. But what makes chickpeas particularly interesting to researchers studying muscle recovery is their leucine content in combination with their fiber structure. Leucine is the amino acid that acts as the primary trigger for muscle protein synthesis. It essentially signals the body that building resources are available. Chickpeas contain meaningful leucine, and their fiber matrix slows digestion enough that amino acid delivery to the bloodstream is gradual rather than immediate. Some exercise nutrition researchers describe this as a more sustained anabolic signal compared to faster digesting protein sources, a finding consistent with traditional use as an endurance food for soldiers and laborers. Dry roasted chickpeas, eaten at a temperature below 375 degrees Fahrenheit, preserve more of their resistant starch than those cooked at higher heat. You can season them with sea salt and cumin, the same spices used in ancient Middle Eastern preparation, and let them cool completely before eating. Room temperature or slightly cooled chickpeas contain more resistant starch than hot ones, because the starch partially retrograded as the temperature drops. This is not modern food science complicating things. It is a natural process that ancient peoples who ate cooked grains and pulses at room temperature were benefiting from without knowing why. Number 11. Pumpkin seeds. Across Mesoamerica, pumpkins and their seeds were among the most sacred of agricultural gifts. The Aztec calendar included specific ceremonial months tied to the harvest of cucurbits. The gourd family and seeds were offered to deities before being consumed. But pumpkin seeds were not merely ceremonial. They were practical medicine. Aztec healers documented their use for physical strength and for addressing parasites that would weaken a working body. Pre-Columbian civilizations in what is now the American Southwest ground pumpkin seeds into pastes used for both food and wound care. An ounce of pumpkin seeds, roughly a small handful, delivers 8 to 9 grams of protein. That is already notable. But pumpkin seeds' real distinction lies in two minerals present in concentrations that are genuinely unusual among plant foods: magnesium and zinc. A single ounce provides approximately 40% of the daily recommended magnesium intake. Magnesium is required for over 300 enzymatic processes in the human body, including the synthesis of ATP, the molecule cells use for energy and the relaxation of muscle fibers after contraction. Zinc, also richly present, is essential for the production of testosterone and insulin-like growth factor, hormones directly involved in muscle repair and growth. Here is the preparation detail. Most people miss entirely the part of the pumpkin seed. With the highest concentration of these minerals is not the inner seed itself, but the thin green seed coat, the hull of the hull. Essentially, that is lost when seeds are heavily processed or when the white outer shell is discarded. Raw or lightly roasted whole pepitas, eaten with that thin green coating intact, deliver more of the mineral density than heavily processed seed products. Roast them at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 to 15 minutes, no hotter, as excessive heat degrades the delicate polyunsaturated fats with a light coating of sea salt. They keep well for 2 weeks in an airtight container and travel as easily as any ancient soldier's trail provision. The ancient world never threw away pumpkin seeds. Every autumn, millions of pounds of them go into American trash cans. That is not an inconvenience. That is a measurable nutritional loss. Number 10. Hemp seeds. Hemp is one of the oldest cultivated plants on Earth. In China, hemp cultivation dates back at least 6,000 years. And ancient Chinese texts describe it as one of the 5 sacred grains, though botanically it is a seed, not a grain. The Han Dynasty physician Hua Tuo, considered the founder of Chinese surgery, used hemp preparations for pain and recovery. In the ancient Near East, hemp seeds were traded along commercial routes predating the formal Silk Road. Seeds identified as hemp have been found in Neolithic burial sites across Europe and Asia. 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds deliver 9 to 10 grams of complete protein, meaning all 9 essential amino acids are present in a profile that is actually favorable compared to many other plant sources. But what makes hemp seeds particularly unusual is their fatty acid composition. They contain omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in a ratio of approximately 3:1, which many nutritionists consider close to the ideal ratio for managing inflammation. Most modern Western diets run omega-6 to omega-3 ratios of 15:1 or higher, a disparity associated in multiple studies with increased systemic inflammation and impaired recovery. There is also a compound unique to hemp called edestin, a globulin protein that bears a structural resemblance to proteins found in human blood plasma. Some researchers studying plant proteins describe edestin as among the most bioavailable of any plant-sourced protein, with digestibility studies suggesting absorption rates above 88%. That is comparable to egg protein, which is the standard benchmark for bioavailability in protein research. Hemp seeds require no preparation at all. 3 tablespoons stirred into a bowl of overnight oats, soaked cold in water or milk for 8 hours, creates a complete protein breakfast with a pleasant, slightly nutty taste. They do not need to be ground, cooked, or soaked. The seed coat is soft enough that no processing is required for full digestion. This was likely why ancient peoples valued them as a traveling food durable. Light, requiring nothing but the ability to swallow. Number 9. Amaranth. In the 16th century, Spanish colonizers arriving in Mexico encountered a food so central to Aztec ceremony that they attempted to ban it entirely. The Aztecs shaped amaranth into figures of their deities, a practice that horrified the colonizers, and the grain was declared contraband, with death threatened for those who cultivated it. And yet amaranth survived. Preserved in remote highland villages, in the seed pouches of women who carried it generation to generation. What the Aztecs could not have known, and what modern analytical chemistry has revealed, is that amaranth contains an albumin protein rich in methionine and cysteine, precisely the sulfur-containing amino acids that legumes like beans and lentils lack. The ancient practice of eating amaranth alongside beans was not just cultural tradition, it was biochemically complementary, creating a combined amino acid profile approaching completeness. Amaranth is approximately 14% protein by weight, with lysine content substantially higher than wheat, rice, or corn. Lysine is the limiting amino acid in most grains, the one present in insufficient quantities, regardless of how much grain is eaten. Amaranth fills that gap. Researchers studying food security have explored it specifically as a staple for populations relying primarily on plant proteins. Simmer 1 cup of amaranth in 2.5 cups of water for 20 to 25 minutes until the grain becomes porridge-like. Or drop a handful into a dry, hot skillet, no oil, and within 30 seconds it pops into something crunchy, nutty, and ready to scatter over anything. The Aztec name for this preparation was alegría, hoy. It survived a suppression campaign. It can certainly survive being overlooked on a grocery shelf. Number 8. Black beans. Long before European contact, agricultural peoples across the Americas practiced a polyculture system called the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash planted together in a single mound. The corn grew tall and provided a climbing structure for the beans. The squash spread wide and kept weeds down while retaining soil moisture. The beans fixed atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, feeding the corn's heavy nutritional demands. This was ecological wisdom encoded in farming practice. But the nutritional wisdom ran just as deep. The pairing of corn and black beans was not accidental. Corn is low in lysine and tryptophan, but contains good amounts of methionine. Black beans are high in lysine, but lower in methionine. Together, they create a complete amino acid profile that neither provides alone. Ancient peoples arrived at this combination through observation and tradition across thousands of years. What modern nutrition science has taken decades of research to explain biochemically, black beans deliver approximately 15 grams of protein per cooked cup. Along with meaningful quantities of leucine, the amino acid that initiates muscle protein synthesis. They are also extraordinarily rich in anthocyanins, the dark pigments that give black beans their color. Anthocyanins belong to a class of compounds called polyphenols, and studies in exercise physiology suggest they may reduce exercise-induced muscle damage and support faster recovery. The darker the bean, the higher the anthocyanin concentration, which means black beans outperform kidney, pinto, and navy beans on this particular metric by a meaningful margin. Cook black beans from dried rather than canned whenever possible, and add a strip of dried kombu seaweed to the cooking water. Kombu contains enzymes that help break down the complex sugars in beans that cause digestive discomfort, and it adds trace minerals, including iodine. Drain the kombu before serving. This technique has been used in Japanese and Korean bean preparations for centuries, not because those cultures knew anything about enzyme chemistry, but because experience taught them that kombu made beans easier to digest and the broth richer in flavor. The mechanism and the wisdom aligned, as they so often do. Number 7. Quinoa. High in the Andes, at elevations where little else would grow. The Inca civilization built an empire in part on a small round seed they called quinoa, which we now call quinoa. Inca emperors performed a ceremonial first planting each year using tools made of gold. The seeds were kept in temples. This was a civilization acknowledging, in the only language available to it, that this food was irreplaceable. Quinoa is botanically a seed, not a grain, and unlike every true grain wheat, rice, corn, oats, quinoa contains all 9 essential amino acids in a profile that researchers have described as comparable to casein, the slow-digesting milk protein, long used as a reference standard in sports nutrition. A cooked cup provides approximately 8 grams of protein, alongside complex carbohydrates that sustain energy over several hours. But the compound most people have never heard of in quinoa is ecdysterone, a phytochemical that functions as a hormone in insects, but that a 2019 study published in Archives of Toxicology found produced statistically significant increases in muscle mass in human subjects performing resistance training compared to placebo. The research is preliminary. The mechanism in humans still under investigation. But the finding is striking enough that ecdysterone has appeared on various sports nutrition regulatory watch lists. This compound was present in every bowl of quinoa the Inca emperors ate, centuries before any researcher thought to look for it. Rinse quinoa under cold water before cooking to remove its natural saponin coating, which is mildly bitter. Cook in a 2-to-1 water ratio. Bring to a boil. Reduce to a simmer. Cover for 15 minutes. Then rest 5 minutes off heat before fluffing. The Inca ate it at elevations where the air was thin and the winters brutal. It was calibrated for conditions far harsher than any modern kitchen. If what you are hearing resonates with you, if you are starting to see that the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science is smaller than anyone told you, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what is coming next goes even deeper. Number 6. Spirulina. More than 500 years ago, the Aztec Empire was sustained in part by a food harvested from the surface of Lake Texcoco, the Great Lake surrounding Tenochtitlan, where Mexico City now stands. Workers skimmed a blue-green film with fine woven nets, dried it on flat stones, and cut it into portable cakes. The Aztec name was Tecuitlatl. A Spanish chronicler, Francisco Hernandez, writing in the 1570s, observed it was eaten daily by as many as 1.5 million people. The long-distance runners who carried communication across the empire reportedly carried these dried cakes as their primary travel food. After the fall of Tenochtitlan, the lake was drained and the food vanished. Then in the 1940s, French botanists studying Lake Chad in Central Africa encountered communities who had been harvesting a nearly identical blue-green algae for centuries. They called it DA, used nets, flat drying stones, and cakes. Two civilizations on opposite sides of an ocean, separated by 500 years, independently developing the same system for the same organism. That parallel is itself evidence of something worth attention. Spirulina is approximately 60 to 70% protein by dry weight, a concentration found in no other whole food. A tablespoon contains roughly 4 grams of complete protein and phycocyanin, the blue pigment that gives spirulina its color. Phycocyanin has been investigated for its capacity to inhibit COX-2, the inflammatory enzyme targeted by common anti-inflammatory medications. The research is ongoing and clinical applications are not yet established. But the mechanism is biologically plausible. Stir 1 tablespoon into cool water with a squeeze of lemon, not hot water. As heat above 130 degrees Fahrenheit degrades phycocyanin, source it from producers who test for heavy metals and microcystin contamination. The Aztec runners did not choose this food by accident. The research is now examining exactly why it worked. Number 5. Tempeh. On the island of Java, in Indonesia. Somewhere between the 12th and 17th centuries, historians still debate the precise origin. Someone discovered that if you inoculated cooked soybeans with a specific mold culture called Rhizopus oligosporus and allowed them to ferment for 24 to 48 hours in warm, humid conditions, the beans transformed into a firm, nutty, deeply satisfying cake that could be sliced, grilled, and eaten with the same satisfaction as meat. Tempeh became foundational to Javanese cooking and to the economies of Indonesian communities that valued affordable, high-protein food. Batik workers, farmers, and laborers built physical strength on tempeh for centuries. Colonial Dutch administrators, arriving in the 18th and 19th centuries, observed the health and physical capacity of Javanese workers and commented on their diet, including tempeh, in administrative records. The food that fed Java was hiding in plain sight, but the colonial world had no framework to recognize it. 3 ounces of tempeh delivers 18 to 19 grams of protein, a number that rivals lean poultry. But fermentation does something that raw soybeans cannot do. Rhizopus oligosporus produces an enzyme called phytase that breaks down phytic acid, the compound in soybeans that binds to zinc, iron, and calcium, and significantly limits their absorption. Fermented tempeh releases these minerals in a form the body can actually use. The same fermentation process produces small amounts of vitamin B, 12 precursors, not sufficient to fully substitute for animal-sourced B12, but a meaningful contribution not present in unfermented soy products. The preparation most associated with tempeh's traditional use involves marinating sliced pieces, cut about a 1/4 inch thick, in a mixture of tamari, ginger, garlic, and a small amount of toasted sesame oil for at least 30 minutes. Then pan frying over medium heat until golden brown on each side. The Maillard reaction at the surface creates flavors that are genuinely savory and deeply satisfying. This is not a compromise food. It is a complete food that the West is only beginning to understand. Number 4. Farro. The Latin word far root of both farro and the word flour referred to emmer wheat, the caloric backbone of the Roman Republic before modern bread wheat varieties displaced it. Roman soldiers were issued a daily grain ration called the frumentum, roughly a kilogram per soldier per day, ground into porridge or baked into flatbreads on campaign. Julius Caesar's legions marched on farro-based rations carried in leather pouches. The empire that shaped Western civilization was physically sustained by this grain. Emmer wheat appears in Exodus 9:32, specifically mentioned as surviving the hail plague that destroyed other crops. a detail that signals its agricultural centrality in the ancient Near East. Ezekiel 49, the passage that has inspired an entire category of modern bread products. Names: emmer wheat, among the grains the prophet was instructed to combine for a fortified survival bread. A cooked cup delivers 6 to 8 grams of protein, alongside the B vitamins, concentrated in the intact bran and germ layers, stripped away in modern refined wheat. Vitamin B6 in particular participates directly in amino acid metabolism without adequate B6. Protein consumed cannot be efficiently processed into the amino acids muscle tissue requires for repair. This is one reason the shift from whole ancient grains to refined flour represents a nutritional loss that goes well beyond fiber. Soak farro overnight in cold water. Then simmer in fresh water for 25 to 30 minutes until tender but still chewy. Season with olive oil, sea salt, and roasted garlic. The grain holds texture when cooled exactly how Roman soldiers would have eaten it. Prepared in the morning and carried through a march. Number 3. Almonds. In Numbers chapter 17, God instructed Moses to place 12 staffs inside the tabernacle. The next morning, Aaron's staff had budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds overnight. The almond was the chosen vehicle for this sign, precisely because it was among the most valued trees in the ancient Near East. The menorah, the sacred lampstand at the center of the tabernacle, was designed with almond blossom-shaped cups. As described in Exodus 2:5-3-3, Genesis 4:3-1-1 records Jacob sending almonds as a royal gift to the ruler of Egypt. In ancient Greece, almonds were associated with a princess, said to transform into an almond tree that bloomed when her beloved returned. Chinese imperial medicine referenced almonds for respiratory support. 3 civilizations. The same tree. The same reverence. An ounce of raw almonds provides 6 grams of protein alongside vitamin E, specifically alpha-tocopherol, in concentrations that make almonds among the most vitamin E-dense whole foods available. Vitamin E concentrates in muscle cell membranes and helps neutralize free radicals generated during intense physical exertion. Studies in exercise physiology associate adequate vitamin E intake with reduced exercise-induced muscle damage and faster recovery of strength after eccentric work, lowering weights, walking downhill, any movement where muscles lengthen under load. Vitamin E requires dietary fat for absorption. Eat almonds with food that contains fat almond butter stirred into oatmeal with a drizzle of olive oil, or a handful with a piece of fruit. Provides the fat matrix the vitamin needs. The tree that blossomed overnight was not chosen arbitrarily. It was the tree the ancient world had learned, through centuries of use, to trust. Number 2. Chia seeds. Here is the story I promised at the beginning. The prophet Elijah is sitting under a juniper tree in the wilderness of Beersheba, asking God to let him die. 1 Kings 19 records this moment with stark simplicity. He had fled from Queen Jezebel, who had promised to kill him within 24 hours. He had walked alone into the desert for a full day. He lay down and said, "It is enough." Then he fell asleep. Twice during that sleep, an angel touched him and told him to rise and eat. Both times. There was a cake baked on coals and a cruse of water. The text says specifically that the second meal was given because the journey before him was too great. Elijah rose and ate, and traveled 40 days and 40 nights on the strength of those provisions to reach Mount Horeb. This is not metaphor. This is a physiological crisis, described with the precision that eyewitness tradition maintains. Complete glycogen depletion, electrolyte loss from extreme stress, HPA axis dysregulation from acute fear, adrenal exhaustion. In modern terms, what medicine would now call a compound physiological breakdown, and it was addressed with simple food. Eaten twice, before a 40-day journey. That pattern sustained energy from simple, The whole provision is exactly what chia seeds delivered to another culture that understood demanding physical travel. The Aztec and Mayan peoples called chia the running food. Long-distance messengers who carried communication across the empire carried chia seeds in small pouches, mixing them with water to form a thick gel. The gel slows gastric emptying, releasing glucose into the bloodstream over hours rather than in a sudden spike. 2 tablespoons provide 4 to 5 grams of complete protein, approximately 11 grams of fiber, and 5 grams of ALA omega, 3 fatty acids, the plant-sourced form that the body can partially convert to the longer-chain compounds involved in inflammation management. Stir 2 tablespoons into 12 ounces of cool water. Wait 10 minutes. Consume before or during extended physical activity. The texture takes some getting used to. The sustained energy does not. The angel's instruction to eat twice before a long journey was wisdom about how bodies actually work. Sustained provision for sustained demand. That principle is consistent across every civilization on this list, and it has never stopped being true. Number 1. Chickpea flour. Here is the surprise I promised. Not a rare superfood. Not an ancient ceremonial ingredient available only through specialty import. Chickpea flour. It is called besan in Indian cooking and farina di seishi in Italian. And it has been used in those traditions for at least 2,000 years to make flatbreads, fritters, and batters that sustained working populations across generations. In Liguria, on the Italian Riviera, a dish called farinata chickpea flour mixed with water, olive oil, and salt, baked in a very hot oven, has been eaten since Roman times. In India, besan is the base of dozens of daily dishes eaten by hundreds of millions of people whose protein needs are met almost entirely through plants. 2 civilizations, separated by continent and culture, independently making the same flour from the same bean. Here is what most people in the West do not know. Chickpea flour contains approximately 22 grams of protein per 100 grams of dry flour, roughly 4 times the protein density of all-purpose wheat flour. It is also a complete protein, with all 9 essential amino acids present. No processing beyond drying and milling the whole bean. The compound that makes chickpea flour particularly interesting to researchers is a class called Bowman-Burke inhibitors, enzyme inhibitors present in legume flours that have been investigated in peer-reviewed literature for their weighty capacity to modulate inflammatory pathways. The clinical evidence is still developing, but ancient cooks knew something consistent. Populations who built their daily bread from legume flour seemed to maintain physical strength through long working lives. The observation and the mechanism are now converging. Farinata combine 1 cup of chickpea flour with 1.5 cups of warm water and a generous pinch of sea salt. Let the batter rest at room temperature for 4 to 8 hours. This fully hydrates the flour and deepens the flavor in a way that a quick mix never achieves. Stir in 2 tablespoons of good olive oil. Pour into a well-oiled cast iron skillet. Bake at 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 22 to 25 minutes, until the edges are golden and the center is just set. Dense, savory, deeply satisfying. This is the food Roman soldiers carried as rations. It is the food Indian weavers ate every morning before work. It costs less than $1 per serving and contains more usable protein than most protein bars on the market. And it has been quietly available in every grocery store that carries international foods, waiting for someone to recognize it for what it is. There is one principle that runs through every food on this list. Industrial processing does not improve ancient foods. It diminishes them. Lentils processed into flour pasta lose their resistant starch. Chickpeas turned into shelf-stable crackers lose their Bowman-Burke inhibitors. Amaranth puffed and sweetened loses its agdisterone. Farro refined into white flour loses its B6 and germ. Hemp processed into protein isolate loses the edestin structure that makes whole hemp seeds so bioavailable. Spirulina dried above 130 degrees loses its phycocyanin. in every case. The processing that makes food more convenient strips away precisely the compounds the ancient world was benefiting from when it ate these foods whole. The people who built empires, crossed deserts, and prayed with cakes baked on desert coals were eating whole seeds, whole legumes, whole grains slowly cooked, carefully fermented, deliberately prepared. They were absorbing the full biological complexity those foods contained. They did not have clinical trials. They had generations of careful observation and the discipline to pass down what worked. The research is now beginning to explain why it worked, and what scripture, ethnobotany, and modern nutritional science consistently agree on is this: the closer a food is to the form in which it grew, the more it has to offer the body that receives it. If the most powerful muscle-building foods in human history have been growing in ordinary soil at minimal cost for thousands of years, that question is worth sitting with. Hit like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. Which food surprised you most? The spirulina the Aztec runners carried across an empire, the farinata that Roman soldiers ate on campaign, or the lentil stew that a man in scripture considered worth more than his entire inheritance. The wisdom was never lost. It was only waiting to be remembered.